in Gaza than people that died, and the aid workers, all they were doing was helping people with the food. They're like a charity in a way. There was a Canadian person that died, and an American, is it British, an Australian, but all them countries are feeling the pain. Will there be retaliation? What's happened? Will the Canadians, Australians not send aid again in Gaza, Israel, or is it not the Israelis' fault? Hopefully, they can get to the bottom of what went on in Israel, who killed these people. They've done it before, apparently. So I thought I'd do another video about this and show my condolences and rest in peace to the people that have died. And I didn't know these people, but it's always good to be respectful to friends and family, even though you don't know them. They've got a family as well, and their mums and dads are going to be upset for what's happened. Like I say, it is a terrible thing what's happened. They didn't deserve that, and why are they targeting innocent people, and especially aid workers, but don't deserve that? They're like a charity that sends people food and helps people in the war zones. It's the same thing in Ukraine and Russia, and you know, will they get targeted there as well? Like I say, it is a shame. It really is, and the Americans and the British are helping them with aid, basically. Cargo planes dropping off food and stuff. Will they keep doing that? Will there be retaliation like the Houthis in the Red Sea, and the British and the Americans in Cyprus had wars with them, didn't they? On the boats, but that's a different story. Anyway, let's going to be looking at this thing on YouTube about war. Will the UK now prepare for Britain war? Will they prepare for war? Who knows? Let's see.
When the Cold War ended,
Let's talk
Mike
about World War
Parrish
II, I think.
picked up a hot bargain. A top-secret nuclear bunker built by the government under his family's farmland.
So would we be safe once we got to this part?
Well, yes, safer than being outside, obviously, because you've got the blast door to go through to start with.
Now a tourist attraction, it's taken on a new relevance amid warnings of future war.
The United Kingdom was heavily attacked with nuclear weapons.
You hear that's the message what was in the old days, World War II.
This is where the Prime Minister of the day might have come in the event of a nuclear strike. The underground safe house in Essex was one of a network of bunkers tasked with keeping government services running to help survivors.
The scale of this bunker underlines how seriously governments during the Cold War...
As you can see, it's a Japanese airfield. It's got in the background, you probably can't see because of the small writing.
These defences were never actually
in Taiwan it's talking about, at the bottom of the screen, if you can't see it there.
That was resourced and regularly rehearsed.
In the wake of Russia's invasion of Ukraine, Britain's Defence Secretary has warned we're moving to a pre-war world. Yet sources have told Sky News there is no national plan for the defence of the UK or the mobilisation of its people in a full-scale conflict. It's a weakness this former commander raised internally more than a decade ago.
The implications of thinking about the revitalisation of a risk from Russia were unpalatable and expensive, and denial, frankly, was cheaper.
Tucked away in the National Archives are some of the UK's old defence plans. Called the Government War Book, they detailed how this country would transition from peace to war in line with a set of alerts for the whole of NATO. Versions have existed since around the end of the First World War, with instructions for everything from calling out the reserves to rescuing national treasures. But this level of planning is expensive, and it was quietly phased out after the Soviet Union collapsed.
Of course, the UK has a range of strategies and frameworks to build resilience and counter threats, but sources tell me it's woefully inadequate compared to the Cold War way of thinking, and they say much more must be done.
While the UK relies on its nuclear weapons and NATO membership to deter threats, officials are understood to be developing a cross-government national defence plan even drawing on lessons from the war book.
Some of that kind of thinking, the thinking that takes you from we don't need to worry about any of that to actually, if we did want to worry about that, how might we do it? I think that's really important.
And it's not just thinking about the military, industry, and the public have crucial roles as well. Now a car plant, this site in Birmingham was transformed from farmland into a Spitfire factory before the Second World War as part of a so-called shadow scheme to grow aircraft production. Facilities also sprang up in the most unlikely of places, including a cowshed in Shropshire.
Shadow factories like this one played a key role in the war, enabling the country to make the weapons it needed to win. It's a legacy of innovation that sources say leaders today should draw on as they look to deter the current threats.
Asked about the allegation that there's no plan for war, a Cabinet Office spokesperson said, "The UK has robust plans in place for a range of potential emergencies and scenarios, with plans and supporting arrangements developed, refined and tested over many years." Practical steps taken to enhance the nation's resilience include the introduction of the Emergency Alert System and other measures, including the UK Government Resilience Framework, the publication of the National Risk Register, and strengthening our work with local partners and frontline authorities. But critics aren't convinced, such as here in Southampton, the home of the Spitfire.
Well, we had a bomb in the garden. We were in the shelter, but my father was outside.
Vera Saxby lived through the Second World War. She volunteered to work for a company that made Spitfire parts. Now, in her 100th year, she's no longer impressed with the UK's resilience.
It's very difficult. I can't see how we would defend ourselves. But don't tell Putin that.
The end of the tunnel, which is
Britain's hollowed-out defences are no secret to anyone as global threats grow.
Do you think this bunker might have to come back to life again?
it would obviously be something one would contemplate. I don't suppose that the government would now take this back. But until government do that...
Like I say, they really need to get prepared for war. You never know what could happen.
I'll be down here.
And they're saying they don't think there's going to be a war, but you never know, do you? The way things are at the minute, and they just seem to be blind and woke, in my opinion. But like I say, why aren't we preparing for war? You know, they're just too blind to see it or something. It's craziness. I'm going to have a look and see what else is on it, unless I've just covered it up with this. I mean, I thought I'd do another... Some people say I'm war mad. But you never know with the Russia and Ukraine. And they could invade the UK eventually. And we got all these migrants coming over to England as well. Northern Ireland, Scotland, Wales, and boats as well. So everyone's trying to escape.
Traditional landlines are being confined to the history books by the end of 2025. BT, Virgin...
About telephones, we'll put this in and see what happens, yeah? Hold on a second. Something about landlines. Phones.
Traditional landlines are being confined to the history books by the end of 2025. BT, Virgin Media, TalkTalk and other big telecom providers are in the process of switching off the 14 million or so copper-based landlines that Brits have been using to make phone calls since 1911. In their place, you'll be making calls using a new broadband-powered alternative known as Voice over IP, or VoIP for short.
So BT and broadband's going. Voice over IP.
Skype or Zoom,
Skype and
you're
Zoom.
familiar with this technology. BT, TalkTalk and Virgin Media
TalkTalk and
all
Virgin.
refer to this new system as digital voice, although depending on who your provider is, they might call it something a little different. So, why is this happening? Plans for a switch-off of traditional analog phone lines began back in November 2017. Crucially, this isn't a government scheme or deadline. The plans came from the industry itself. At the time, the telecom industry said they were struggling to find components to repair and maintain this copper phone line system because few companies still existed that were creating the right parts for this century-old technology. But it's not just about the nuts and bolts that keep the phone lines up and running. If you've ever made a call to a friend or relative on the other side of the planet, you'll know that digital calls can offer much clearer call quality, especially over longer distances. Not only that, but a number of features that you'd probably normally associate with your mobile phone, like blocking incoming calls from withheld numbers or putting other calls in a queue when you're already on the phone, are also possible with all digital landlines. And for most people, the switch should be as simple as taking your existing home phone and plugging into the back of the Wi-Fi router that you were sent by your provider. And that's it. The phone number will stay the same, as should your monthly bills. So what's the problem? Well, unfortunately, it's not always as simple as that. Some people have been left without a landline for weeks, while others have lost the home phone number they've had for decades. But the biggest headache with the switchover has been for the 1.8 million people across the UK who use personal safety alarms around their neck that can make an emergency call at the touch of a button. Predominantly used by elderly or vulnerable people, these devices can make a life-saving call after a bad fall or during a critical health episode. Many of these telecare devices work seamlessly with the new broadband-powered landlines, but enough critical phone calls didn't get through that at the end of 2023, BT, Virgin Media, TalkTalk and other big telecom providers slammed the brakes on the upgrade to digital voice for the most vulnerable in society. Now, work has restarted since then, but not before all companies agreed to a new set of guidelines that guaranteed that people wouldn't be left without their telecare device during the migration process. Sadly, that's not all, as there are a few other quirks with this digital voice landline system. Since they rely on a broadband connection to make calls, an internet outage or a power cut will leave you without your home phone. That's very different to the trusty old copper phone lines, which are powered and therefore can continue to work when everything else in your home is out. That's pretty important during emergencies. Thankfully, there are a few ways to solve this. Vulnerable people can request a backup battery pack that can be connected to the home phone to keep everything up and running, even during power outages. And phones with a built-in SIM card that immediately switches over to the mobile network during a broadband outage are also available. For most people, the switchover should be a seamless process. And if you've already got full fibre broadband at home, chances are you're already using digital voice and hopefully getting a few less spam calls. But if you're worried about the switchover, the best thing to do is be proactive. If you don't have broadband at home, or live in an area with poor mobile signal in case anything goes wrong, or use a telecare safety device, then it's best to reach out to your provider and flag your concerns to them. BT, TalkTalk, Virgin Media and the other big telecom providers in the UK say they'll always reach out at least 4 weeks before a switch is going to happen to make sure everything's in order.
Don't know about Sky TV or Sky Broadband as well.
Century-old analog copper phone lines to a new VoIP system.
Well, that's very interesting what they're saying about phones anyway. What do you think about phones? Everybody's got a phone, or some people haven't got one. There's not much on the TV today. I think there's some things, but not a lot of things. Seeing what else we can put on. I thought I'd do a quick video. I mean, it's like I'm addicted to doing videos every day. I need to put out a video or a different video every day, so that's what I like to do. Keeps me busy. We'll have a look at this drone, British drone thing or something.
Britain's one.
Right. Done there. Try and flick the channel over. Right.
Britain's £1.4 billion spy drones programme has been branded an unmitigated disaster by one MP after a report revealed the drones struggle to work in poor weather conditions. None of the so-called watchkeeper drones are believed to be out on operations, despite costing £5 million each.
The machines are based on an Israeli craft, but have been so extensively modified that some are too heavy to fly. 8 of the drones have
Too heavy
reportedly
to
been
fly, eh?
written off at a cost of £40 million. Joining me to discuss this in the studio is security expert Will Geddes, and down the line is former Army officer and defence analyst Lieutenant Colonel Stuart Crawford. Lieutenant Colonel, let me start with you first. Just explain to people who are coming new to this story how on earth we could have ended up with such a load of dud drones.
Well, I mean, that is the $60 million question, Daisy. And I'm afraid to say it's the latest in a long line, a litany, if you like, of disastrous British Army, British Armed Services equipment procurement programs which have come unstuck. Now, we know that the Watchkeeper is based on the Israeli drone, I think it's called the Hertz or something like that, which has been used successfully for many years. But there is a thing which people like me refer to called British exceptionalism. And that means that we seem to be unable to look at other people's military equipment and say, oh, that's a nice bit of kit, we'll have that, without imposing many, many, many alterations and differences, which inevitably lead to an increase in cost. And in the case of the Watchkeeper, it would appear a fall-off in performance. It's an old story, it continues year on year, and no political party seems to be able or willing to tackle it.
Well, Stuart, let me just pick you up on this exceptionalism element that you're talking about. Is what you're saying that we don't like taking stuff off the shelf? We like it to be sort of haute couture for our defence forces, and therefore we tinker and play and add and end up ruining it? Or is it? I mean, does it come from a sense of superiority, or what's it all about? Why can't we just accept what other people have got?
I don't know. I mean, we used to talk about a thing called not invented here syndrome in the military, and it applies to other areas of life as well. But not just the Watchkeeper drone, which seems to have worked perfectly well for the Israelis, although I'm only using the same open sources accounts as everybody else. But we also have another procurement disaster, the daddy of them all, which is the Ajax armored reconnaissance vehicle. Again, based on an existing design called the ASCOD, used by the Spanish and Austrian armed forces, and yet coming into British service, it has been hugely delayed, hugely over budget, and doesn't work well. Until recently, it didn't work, and that's because we insist on modifications and changes to design on almost every occasion.
Well, help me out here. Why do we insist on modifying to death, literally?
Well, I mean, to a certain extent, I mean, Stuart's absolutely right. Some of it can come down to the fact that they want to adapt it for particular theatres of operation, and it may be in certain circumstances inclement weather, which in this particular instance seems to have failed desperately, because one of the things that I've certainly seen with the procurement process of the MOD is they'll purchase weapons or munitions or equipment that can be deployed in territories where it's manufactured, which could be very sort of warm, very high temperature environments, which are in otherwise quite dry, and then be deployed into environments where it's sub-zero temperatures. It could be rain, there could be sleet, there could be all sorts of aspects. I mean, it's the old leaves on the train line, if you like, to a certain extent. So some of the, as Stuart says, it's some of the modifications that are done, which can then add to the bill. It then makes it obviously incredibly more expensive than the off-the-shelf product. But the thing that really defies logic is that we look at the actual use of drones, UAVs, quadcopters, in various different theatres of operation right now, and many of these are actually off the shelf. And I know certainly many military forces around the world will buy consumer drones and then adapt them at far lesser cost than they do going to a major aerospace defence organisation like Lockheed, for example.
So let's talk about drones and how important they are in modern warfare. Obviously, we've heard a lot about drones in the Russia-Ukraine battlefield, the attacks on the cargo ships by the Houthi rebels. You know, my understanding was a lot of those, if not all, were done by drones. I'm guessing there are lots of different types of drones, and there are more expensive and inexpensive, but they've obviously been used by other people quite successfully.
Yeah, very, very successfully. I mean, for example, in the Ukraine-Russian conflict right now, since the beginning of the war, there's been over 4,500 drones which have been deployed to carry out advanced reconnaissance, to find out enemy positions, and even being used to deploy IEDs, for example, improvised explosive devices, or munitions of various sorts. That has created a real complex theatre of operation, certainly for Ukraine in their defensive positions, but Ukraine equally have also been deploying many of these UAVs for their own purposes and for doing exactly the same. Now, most of the ones that I've certainly seen, and certainly from my own teams that have been down there, they have been very much the consumer types. DJI, which is a very, very large manufacturer of consumer drones across the world, based in China. Many of them are those devices. And what they've done is they've actually adapted them, as have the Houthis, using them in the Red Sea. And the Red Sea, for example, within a period of 4 hours, deployed about 600 drones against some of the ships and some of the carriers which were actually in the Red Sea at the time. So, and that's been done at a very, very low cost. I mean, you can look at probably some of the most advanced technology with thermal cameras. You're looking at about $10,000 for a piece of kit. And then you look at the bill that the MOD has been footing for their devices and their inability to be able to be utilized for their purposes.
Stuart, let me talk to you about this subject from a military...
No bloody adverts. Hate adverts.
Perspective, but looking at it from a slightly broader issue, in that there has been a lot spoken and written about in the last few months about the size of the military. You can fit our British military into Twickenham Stadium, that we're down to 70,000 or whatever it is, and many people have said that that's been a trend that has come from the MOD for the last decade or two, where they've said we don't need boots on ground. What we need is toys, we need technology, we need all the gadgets and gizmos, and we can do away with the humans. Do you think in some ways that's gone too far now, and that's why we've seen A, too few boots on the ground, and B, too much investment in some technology that simply doesn't work?
Well, I mean, the short answer is yes and yes. All the modern gizmos and things that do wonderful things are important, and we should invest in them sensibly, arguably not as we have done in the Protector drone, but sensibly, and get value for money. But if one lesson has come out of the conventional European war in Ukraine, is that you need lots of stuff, because warfare is attritional. And sadly, you lose things. You lose equipment. Even more sadly, you lose people. And that's always been the way of warfare. So we need to have lots and lots of stuff. So it's not a case of either or, which I think some politicians have fallen into the trap of saying we don't need a battalion because we've got 12 drones, which is just utter nonsense, because they do different things and have different capabilities. And that's the mindset that we have to overcome. The other problem is, Daisy, and everybody has said it for years gone by, is that there are no votes in defence. And other priorities prevail in government until the enemy are at the gates. And they're not at the gates yet, thank goodness, but they're getting closer.
Yeah, absolutely right, isn't it? What Stuart's saying there. I mean, we've got the drones, therefore we don't need that battalion. Yeah. I've heard lots of people over the years say that from the MOD, and now it's coming back to bite us. And B, this almost more important issue, there are no votes in defence again until or when it's right on our doorstep.
Yeah, I mean, there's a few areas to unpick of what Stuart covered there, and some of which I'd agree with, some of which I wouldn't necessarily agree with wholeheartedly. The first of which is obviously our defence spending is woefully inadequate. And I think in terms of the enemy being at our gates, I think they're actually inside the gates right now. And we've got to look at some very serious considerations in what we do in our deployment of assets and resources, particularly with the military. But going beyond that, in terms of technology and its application within a theatre of war, one of the biggest challenges at the moment is a battalion and actual physical manpower is absolutely critical. And I agree with Stuart on that. But the Ukrainians, for example, have had to adapt their strategies because some of these particular UAVs, particularly racing drones, which are super fast, they're very difficult to take out. You can't literally shoot them out of the sky because they move too quickly. And they are uncovering or discovering Ukraine positions, which have meant that the Ukrainians have to now move at night. Because unless there is thermal imagery, obviously with those cameras, it's very easy for the Russians to see and then direct artillery into their position. So it kind of goes hand in hand. And as warfare is always the case, it's evolving on a constant basis. And technology becomes even more important.
And it will be fascinating. We know there'll be an election this year. It will be fascinating to see if defence finally goes up the political agenda, as I think all three of us believe it should. Whether or not it will, we'll have to wait and see. Stuart Crawford and Will Geddes, thank you very much.
We can deal with a bloody war, probably. Or some people may disagree, but that's the way it is. I'm going to put the other thing back on. Find something else to put on. We'll find the channel. There's so much things I want to film. You know what I mean? You want to film everything.
This morning. So you have heard about the death of 3 British aid workers killed after being hit by an Israeli missile strike. James Henderson, 33, John Chapman, 57. They both served in the Royal Marines. Were named.
Yeah, it's a shame about these aid workers.
A former army rifleman and sniper marksman. Well, joining us now is General Lord Richard Dannett, the former head of the British Army. Good morning to you, Richard. Thanks for joining us again. Looking at the detail of the deaths of these men, it's very difficult to conclude that they weren't deliberately targeted and to some extent hunted down. Their cars were clearly marked with the World Central Kitchen logo. They had GPS trackers, SOS beacons, and following an approved IDF route. And each car was hit. Each time the passengers who were injured were put in the next vehicle, and then that car was hit. And this happened repeatedly until these men lost their lives.
Wasn't just men, it was women as well that died. Australian woman died, and Canadian and 3 British people.
We have in front of our eyes and the reports that we received. Now the IDF are saying that it's a mistake, but actually,
yeah, of course it was a mistake. It happened before.
And one has to understand that they must have had eyes on their targets to watch them go from one vehicle to another vehicle to another vehicle. Their explanation would be that they assumed that they were terrorists. But given that charity workers and aid workers are giving their coordinates to the IDF and the vehicles were marked as relief vehicles, it's very hard to conclude that this is anything other than deliberate. I mean, it may well have been a misguided deliberate action on the part of whatever operator was operating those missiles. But it's an absolute tragedy. It shouldn't have happened. And I'm afraid there's a wider point, which is rather indicative, but despite what the IDF is saying, is the too indiscriminate nature of the way that they're using violence in Gaza.
And Bill Dannett, this isn't, obviously we're all very saddened, and it's brought it home to us because 3 of these people who died were British. But I think it's 196 aid workers have died in this war. And of course, you do, that these things can happen. But if this strike against these aid workers was deliberate, it's a war crime, isn't it?
Well, it's certainly contrary to all the norms of law, of war, and there are legal protections for humanitarian workers in conflict situations, and particularly given that their vehicles were marked as aid vehicles, there really is no excuse at all. The IDF says, the Israelis say that they're going to have an inquiry, and I think given the scale of this tragedy, they must have an inquiry. It must be transparent, it must be rapid, and we must know what the answer is. And if there were Israeli military people culpable of what they would call a mistake, then action must be taken against them. This kind of thing is just not acceptable. As you say, 196 aid workers.
It wasn't a mistake, though. The president of Israel was laughing about it. So how can it be a mistake?
And as a direct result of this strike against these aid workers,
he said things happen. They shouldn't do, should they?
Amounts of aid were turned away. One great ship is returned to Cyprus. You know better than anybody that starvation is a well-known, well-tried and trusted military technique, whether it's Stalingrad or Malta. Perhaps that's what Netanyahu is trying to achieve, to starve them into submission.
Well, he's certainly using, as you would see, all means available to try and achieve his aim of completely destroying Hamas. Now, the Israelis say that Hamas could end this war today, tomorrow, by just declaring unilateral surrender. Well, they won't do that. Their objective is the destruction of the Israeli state. the Israeli state's objective is the destruction of Hamas. Netanyahu is determined, it would seem, to fight this through to the finish. But they must do it much more carefully. They must protect innocent civilians. They certainly must protect aid workers, and they must not use famine as a weapon of war. It's perfectly acceptable to track down terrorists and to kill them or arrest them or whatever they choose to do. But innocent civilians must be protected, and aid workers and indeed medical facilities must also be protected.
Lord Dannett, I really want to ask you about Johnny Mercer, the Veterans Minister. He's obviously challenging this order for him to hand over the names of the whistleblower soldiers. He's been asked to identify alleged atrocities, people who committed alleged atrocities in Afghanistan by the SAS. What's your opinion on the very difficult position that he finds himself in?
Well, Johnny's in a difficult position because the judge has placed him in that difficult position. The fact of the matter is that what Johnny is doing is upholding the right of those who have got information that they think should be made available to an inquiry, to find its way to the inquiry in a way that they can trust. And it's really a question of protecting the identity of whistleblowers. Now, if a potential whistleblower can't trust an elected member of parliament, a government minister, then I think things have come to a pretty poor pass. And the whole point really is that Johnny has given the information, the inquiry has got that information, and there is absolutely no need for the names of those witnesses to be made public. Many journalists have protected their sources over the years. They haven't been thrown into jail for that. And I think it's the judge picking the wrong fight at the wrong time with the wrong person. Johnny has got a fantastic track record as the Minister of State for Veterans Affairs in looking after the interests of veterans and serving people. So for the judge to pick on him and threaten him with jail is, as I said, it's the wrong battle at the wrong time. The issue is protecting the identity of whistleblowers and allowing them to have the confidence to come forward to give information to the inquiry. And the inquiry is already benefiting from the information that Johnny has given them.
Can I just ask you, Lord Dannett, if he were to go to jail as a result of this, there would be an outcry, wouldn't there? And there
I would be leading that outcry. Right. I think it's quite ridiculous. The judge has picked, as I said twice now, the wrong battle with the wrong person at the wrong time. Yes, of course, Johnny wants to uphold his personal integrity, but the fundamental principle here is that of the ability of whistleblowers to make information available to an inquiry, to a trial, whatever, and for their identity to be protected. And that's the issue. I think the judge needs to reflect long and hard over what he is actually doing at the present moment.
Okay, thank you so much for your time, Lord Richard Dannett. There. Now let's go back to this story about the aid workers being killed. The Conservative MP for the Isle of Wight, who sits on the Foreign Affairs Select Committee, Bob Seeley, joins us now. Good morning, Bob. Your reaction to this story, do you agree that it looks deliberate? Although if so, that is a very serious situation.
Okay, morning, Beth, morning, Andrew. Condolences to the families. First and foremost, I think they sounded like impressive men with impressive military records. We don't know, is a simple answer, whether it's a war crime. A mistake is not a war crime. Not having
but I don't think it's a mistake. They did it before.
Could be.
How can a mistake be twice?
I think I would be very wary about that. The important point, Bev, here is that this has been happening to a lot of Palestinians who haven't been involved necessarily with Hamas and who have been killed in a similar way. And the amount of people who are being killed who are innocent and not part of this conflict looks like that it is very high. And the reason why this is impacting in the media is because there are 7 of them. They were Westerners and 3 of them were Brits.
That's the point. I think Bob, 196 aid workers have died altogether. Is that a sign that Israel, of course, they are? It's legitimate to take the war back to Hamas after what happened on October the 7th. But is Israel now just being too indiscriminate, too careless, almost too reckless?
I think the answer, sadly, is probably yes. And I say that as someone who believes that Israel absolutely has the right to self-defense. And in international humanitarian law, there are 2 principles. The right to use military force when other measures fail, and absolutely Israel has the right to do that. But also it has to do it with humanity. And an important part of humanity when looking at international law, war crimes, Geneva Conventions, is whether you're doing things proportionally. And I think there is an argument, and a strong argument now, that Israel isn't doing things in proportion. And the strategy of levelling Gaza and being willing to endure very high civilian casualties is going to do huge damage to the state of Israel.
Okay, all right, Bob. Good to see you. Bob Seeley there, MP for the Isle of Wight, who also has a military background, actually, in his family, and giving us his take on that.
The next thing that people on the left of the Labour Party be clamoring for us to stop our arms sales to Israel. That'd be the next thing.
And I think that's probably sensible. I can't like. Well, we had that chaotic situation, didn't we, where there was the vote on the ceasefire or not, which just fell into disarray with Lindsay Hoyle, the Speaker, just a few months ago. So it's very difficult, isn't it, when our politicians, when our Prime Minister even hasn't called for a ceasefire.
Calling for a humanitarian pause.
This stuff is going to happen. Right.
Up there.
The whole world's gone mad in a way. But anyway, I better end the video. Thank you for all joining me, and I'll do some more videos later. Take it easy, peace. Keep safe, keep positive. Take it easy.